In this video, we're going to talk about Andrew D. Irvine's play, Socrates on Trial. Now, this is an academic's play. This is not a dramatist's play. But being an academic myself, I don't hate that. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of scaffolding material here. There's a lot of informative material here. There's a lot of stuff that's not necessarily good drama or good performance material, but it's very, very informative. So, there are 36 pages of prefatory materials, including background on Socrates' life, background on the sources that this play is drawn from, which includes primarily Aristophanes' Clouds, Plato's Apology, Plato's Crito, and Plato's Phaedo. That doesn't sound right, Phaedo, but I think it is. Yeah. It includes a pronunciation guide for everybody's names in the play. It includes background on how the play was developed. 36 pages of information before we get to the actual play. And then at the end, we go from page 123 up through page 136 with notes to the play and a bibliography for further reading. I don't know how many plays you have read, audience member. Considering that you watch this channel and I do a lot of reviews of plays, I'm guessing you've read some plays. Generally, you don't get that much material. This is a lot. And then we have, at the beginning of each act, a speech by the leader of the chorus. And this speech is basically a lecture. This is more like a classics lesson than it is like I'm going and seeing a play. So, the play is set up in 3 acts. Each act is based on 1 to 2 of the major sources that Irvine draws from. Act 1 is Aristophanes' Clouds. Act 2 is Plato's Apology. And Act 3 are Crito and Phaedo. Act 1 starts with the leader of the chorus giving this speech. Welcome, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us. During Greece's golden age, rather than staying home to be taught by their parents, many young men had begun studying under iterant teachers called sophists. It was this perversion of the natural order that led Aristophanes to write The Clouds, a play that's part slapstick comedy, part vulgar gossip, and part bawdy vaudeville show. In fact, some of Aristophanes' dialogue is almost guaranteed to make you blush. Aristophanes' play tells the story of how a father named Strepsiades takes his lazy, long-haired son Phidippides to be taught by one of Athens' new intellectuals. The teacher Strepsiades visits is named Socrates, although the real Socrates will want to warn you that the Socrates you see on stage is nothing more than a comic distortion invented by Aristophanes for the sake of a few cheap laughs. We get to hear from the real Socrates after the intermission when we return for a presentation of Plato's famous Apology. This is Plato's dramatization of the speech Socrates gave in his own defense after he had been charged with corrupting the youth and failing to recognize the traditional Greek gods. The jury in front of which Socrates spoke was large, perhaps 500 or more of his fellow citizens, which made it more difficult for jury members, and then stage instructions say, while offering a member of the audience a bribe, to be bribed. Stage instructions say, while withdrawing the bribe as the audience member reaches out. Too slow. In today's performance, everyone here will be serving as jurors. After Socrates' speech, you'll be asked to cast your vote in favor of his guilt or innocence. But before we get to Socrates' trial, we first get to enjoy Aristophanes' play and learn why Strepsiades feels that, rather than being educated, his son has been corrupted by the newfangled educators of his day. We join Strepsiades just as he's about to knock on the door of a peculiar little building on the edge of Athens called the School of Thinkology. It's pretty lengthy opening monologue. That is very much exposition. Again, this is not a technique you would expect to see from someone who is primarily a dramatist, whose primary occupation is writing plays. This is the kind of thing that I would probably do if I wrote a play. A lot of background, a lot of detail, a lot of information, which sets up what follows, but in a way it also kind of risks taking away from the action, because we're now being told here's what to expect. So it's an interesting technique. We get the same thing at the beginning of each of these 3 sections. But one of the things that I want to sort of draw your attention to, because I think this is really interesting and important, is this idea that, as the leader of the chorus says, in today's performance, everyone here will be serving as jurors. After Socrates' speech, you'll be asked to cast your vote in favor of his guilt or innocence. Because this idea of incorporating the audience, I think, is a really, really interesting and important one. Almost certainly audiences in ancient Greece were engaged with performances. Like, this idea that you should go to the theater and sit quietly in the dark and just watch is very much a modern idea. It really doesn't develop until the mid-1800s or so. Like, if you go back to Elizabethan drama, the drama of Shakespeare, if you look at 18th century melodrama or things like this, the golden age of French theater, any of these traditions, and these are European traditions exclusively. There are other world traditions of drama that have different etiquette. But, I mean, Irvine's a Canadian playwright, so he is situated in a sort of Euro-American context. But in all of these theater traditions, audiences were engaged with the action. They would shout at the actors. They would boo the villains. They would cheer for the heroes, etc., etc. So this idea of engaging the audience is very much something that's kind of been rediscovered in recent decades. But it's interesting in this play because jury duty for the ancient Greeks, for the ancient Athenians in particular, was a major component of democratic citizenship. Like, citizens served on juries, and that was a key component, something that you just did as a member of Athenian society, as a member of the polis. So the fact that this play incorporates the audience as a jury is a really interesting recreation of that democratic engagement. We get a little bit more information about this at the beginning of Act 2, from the leader of the chorus. He says, in an Athenian court there were no lawyers. The accusers and the accused spoke for themselves, so after hearing from his accusers, Socrates had to give a speech in his own defense. It's this speech we're going to hear next. Following the speech, it will be your job as jurors to decide Socrates' guilt or innocence. After he completes his speech, you'll be asked to walk to the front of the theater to vote. Be sure to exercise your vote wisely. There's one other thing. Athenian juries weren't quiet. If people thought a speaker was stretching or misrepresenting the truth, they'd often yell out. So if you hear others heckling, you're welcome to join in. So again, this is an interactive, engaged audience. but they're being asked to cast their votes in the way that Athenians cast votes in the 5th century BCE, with colored pebbles, either black for guilty or white for innocent. And at the end of Act 2, or toward the end of Act 2, the Archon, who's not necessarily the judge, but more sort of the figure who presides over the trial and sort of facilitates the process, the Archon actually tells the audience members, come up to the front, take a white pebble for innocent, a black pebble for guilty, put them in this container, whatever container it is. Then the Archon and the dignitaries who are up on stage with him take the votes and go off stage. And it says here, after a short time, Miletus, Anytus, and Lycon, those are the 3 people who accused Socrates of corrupting the youth and denying the gods of Greece. They return. Socrates and the guard return. The Archon and dignities return. And the Archon announces the votes have been counted. Socrates has been found guilty of corrupting the youth. Some hecklers chant yes, some hecklers chant no. And then Socrates says something very interesting. He says, men of Athens, please, I'm not upset about what's happened. It's not a big surprise. The amazing thing is how close the vote was. I thought I'd lose by far more than this. If only 30 votes had gone the other way, I'd have been acquitted. Now that's interesting because most modern theaters are not that big. This... I don't know if I actually saw where this was originally produced. Chances are it won't mean anything to me anyway. But most contemporary theaters... okay. First production involving a modified version of the current script was presented March 2007 at the University of British Columbia Chan Center for the Performing Arts. I have no idea how many people that seats. I have no idea how many tickets they sold. But 30 is a substantial chunk for most modern theater audiences. Most modern theaters do not hold that many people. I think the estimates are that there were about 500 people at Socrates' trial. So 30 is a decent chunk of that. If you've got 100 in a modern audience, 30 is not that close. If you need 30 votes to go the other way, 30 is not that close. The vote was not that close. But I kind of just don't believe it at the end of the day. Like, we don't get the accusation speeches against Sophocles. All that we get here is Sophocles' defense of himself as recorded by Plato, who has a vested interest in making Socrates seem right and his accusers seem wrong. So while Socrates historically was found guilty, I don't see any way, based on what we get in this play, that Socrates would possibly be found guilty by a modern audience. So there's almost a sleight of hand here, in that while the audience is being asked to act as the jurors in this democratic echo of the ancient Greek judicial system, I kind of think their votes are not really being counted. I think the play takes the vote tally of the actual trial of Socrates and substitutes that in for what the audience actually chooses. Now, there are actually plays that are based on a trial format where the audience serves as the jury and they get to vote at the end and decide whether or not the protagonist is guilty or not. This, to me, doesn't seem like one of those plays. It seems like a play that pretends to have that democratic ethos, but actually kind of undercuts it. So it's an interesting maneuver there at the end. I'll say that.